Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into something pretty fascinating today, cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, you know that feeling you get when something just clashes with what you believe or what you think you know?
Right, like you try that new restaurant everyone's raving about and it's, well, not great.
Or you find out, I don't know, that politician you admire did something, well, not so admirable.
Exactly. It's that mental discomfort. We're going to be looking at a guide that claims to have a formula for actually using that feeling to influence people.
Sounds a bit, manipulative, maybe.
A little bit. But that's what makes it so interesting to unpack. I mean, this isn't just some psych term, right? This dissonance thing affects us all the time.
It really does. It shapes our choices, even if we don't realize it.
So before we get into the whole how to weaponize it thing, let's talk about how this plays out in real life. The guide uses a pretty wild example. A UFO cult from the 50s.
Oh, yeah, that was a classic. They were convinced the world was ending, had the date and everything.
So what happened when it didn't?
Well, you'd think they'd abandon the whole belief system, right? Admit they were wrong.
Makes sense to me.
But they didn't. They actually doubled down, claiming their devotion had saved the world.
Wow. So instead of facing the dissonance, they just twisted it to fit their existing beliefs?
That's exactly it. They resolved the discomfort by making the belief stronger, even though there was no evidence.
That's incredible. It's like our brains are working against us sometimes.
Sometimes it seems that way, but it makes sense when you think about it. We crave consistency.
Right. It's easier to stick with what we know than to admit we might be wrong.
Especially if that belief is tied to our identity, our sense of self.
Okay, that leads to the guide's other example, the tension between being environmentally conscious and, well, brand loyalty.
Ah, yes. That's a dilemma a lot of people face. You find out your favorite company isn't so eco-friendly after all.
It's like that feeling when you discover your favorite band's lead singer is, I don't know, a terrible person.
You're hit with that conflict. You love their music, but now you know this awful thing about them.
Makes you want to just ignore it and keep listening.
Because the alternative is that discomfort, that dissonance. And sometimes it's easier to just avoid it.
So how does this discomfort actually lead to change then? Because sometimes it feels like we dig in our heels even harder when we're confronted with something that challenges our beliefs.
It's true. The guide calls this the backfire effect.
Catchy name.
It's counterintuitive, but studies show that sometimes when our core beliefs are challenged, we actually become more entrenched in them.
It's like our brains are protecting us from having to change.
Protecting our sense of self, our identity, makes you think about how much of what we believe is truly based on facts versus just wanting to fit in or protect our ego.
Yeah, it's deep.
It is, and it brings us back to the whole idea of weaponizing this dissonance. If you can create this discomfort in someone,
You might be able to steer them toward a certain belief or action just to get rid of that bad feeling.
it's more subtle than just saying, do this because I said so, right? It's about creating an internal struggle.
So it's like planting a seed of doubt and letting it grow on its own. But I mean, isn't that kind of manipulative?
That's where the ethical considerations come in. Just because we can use these techniques doesn't mean we should.
Right. So before we dive into their formula, which, let's be honest, sounds a little intense,
It does.
can we talk about why change is so hard in the first place? The guide mentions admitting we're wrong can feel like a personal attack.
Oh, absolutely. Because our beliefs are often deeply tied to how we see ourselves.
It's not just about being right or wrong. It's about our identity, who we are.
Exactly. And changing our mind can feel like we're rejecting a part of ourselves.
Especially if those beliefs are shared by our social group, like our friends or family.
It can feel like betraying your tribe.
Which brings us back to this guide's formula for, well, using cognitive dissonance to influence people.
6 steps sounds a bit like a recipe for, well, I don't know.
Mind control. But let's break it down and see what they're really getting at.
Okay, so they start with this thing called obtaining agreements on identity statements.
Sounds formal.
Very. But really, it's about framing the person you want to influence in a positive light.
So instead of saying, you made a bad decision there, you say something like, you're usually so good at this.
You're appealing to their self-image, making them feel good about themselves.
And hopefully more open to what you're going to suggest next.
Exactly. It's subtle, but it can be very effective.
So you're not just telling them what to do. You're creating an environment where they feel good about making the quote-unquote right choice.
Which just happens to be the choice you want them to make.
Okay, I see where this is going. What's step 2 in this master plan?
The personality inventory question.
Sounds even more official.
It is, but it's actually pretty simple. It's about getting the person to articulate a positive trait they believe they have.
So instead of saying you're a generous person, you might ask, what's the most generous thing you've ever done?
Exactly. You're getting them to verbalize it, to own that trait. And that makes it harder for them to later act in a way that contradicts what they've just said about themselves.
It's like setting a trap.
In a way, yes. They've basically declared themselves to be a certain kind of person, so now they're more likely to make decisions that align with that self-image.
Okay, so they've been flattered. They've declared themselves to be, like, awesome. What's next?
It gets even more interesting with the negative dissociation technique.
Negative dissociation.
Yeah.
That sounds ominous.
It's not as complicated as it sounds. It's basically about subtly putting down other people or groups to elevate the target person.
So, like saying, most people wouldn't be brave enough to do this, but you're different.
Exactly. You're reinforcing the idea that they're special, that they're above the average person.
Definitely sounds manipulative.
It can be.
Wow.
But again, it's often done subtly. Like, you might say something like, a lot of people are afraid to take risks, but you're not like that. You're a go-getter.
Okay, so you're not outright insulting anyone, but you're definitely implying that the target person is superior because they possess these positive traits that others lack. What comes after that?
This is where things get really crafty. They bring in the article technique.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this article technique.
It's all about using external sources to further validate those desired traits. You might casually mention an article you read that talked about how important those qualities are, subtly linking the target person to those findings.
So it's like saying, hey, science agrees that these traits are valuable, and guess what? You have them. It's a way of borrowing authority to make your point.
Precisely. It adds a layer of credibility to your claims.
Smart. What's next?
The next step is negative offcasting. It involves telling a story about someone who failed because they lacked the target traits.
So it's like a cautionary tale, but one that subtly reinforces the idea that the target person is on the right track because they do have those traits.
Exactly. It creates a subtle fear of missing out, suggesting that if you don't embrace these positive qualities, you'll end up like the person in the story.
Okay, so we've built them up, subtly put down others, and even thrown in a cautionary tale. What's the final step in this grand scheme? It sounds like they're really going all out.
The last step is called introduction to a new identity, and it's the culmination of all the previous steps. It involves introducing the target person to someone else while describing them as embodying the desired traits.
So you're publicly labeling them with those positive qualities,
Mm-hmm.
creating social pressure to live up to that label.
Exactly. It's a subtle way of solidifying the transformation you've been orchestrating throughout the conversation. The target person is now being seen by others as possessing those traits, which reinforces their own self-perception.
Wow, it's all very subtle, but when you put it all together, it's clear that this formula is designed to create a powerful psychological shift in the target person. It's not just about persuasion, it's about subtly manipulating their self-perception.
It's important to remember, though, that the guide's full example demonstrates how these techniques can be woven into a seemingly natural conversation. It's not about being overtly manipulative or forceful.
But even if it's subtle, it still feels a bit unsettling, doesn't it? It makes you realize how easily we can be influenced, even when we think we're in control.
That's the power of cognitive dissonance. It's a fundamental aspect of human psychology that can be used to shape behavior in very specific ways.
This is heavy stuff.
Yeah.
It makes you want to go back and analyze every conversation you've ever had, wondering if someone was secretly using these techniques on you.
Perhaps. Or maybe just makes you a little more aware of your own thought processes and how susceptible we all are to these subtle forms of influence. It's almost like, we've got this secret decoder ring now.
Right. Like, are we being manipulated all the time and just not even noticing?
I wouldn't say it's always manipulation. I mean, think about it. Influence is everywhere, right?
Yeah, like trying to convince your friend to see the movie you want to see.
Exactly. We're always trying to persuade each other.
But I guess this weaponizing thing feels different, right? More calculated.
It's the awareness of the psychology behind it, knowing how this dissonance thing works.
So how do we know when it's crossed the line into, straight up manipulation? Is there like an ethics test for this?
It's tricky, but a good starting point is, what's your intention? Are you genuinely trying to help someone or just getting them to do what you want?
Like a doctor prescribing medicine versus someone, I don't know, selling snake oil.
Exactly. It's about the motivation.
And being transparent, right?
Yeah.
Not hiding the fact that you're trying to, well, influence them.
Huge difference between casually mentioning an article you liked and, like, twisting research to fit your agenda.
So it's not always unethical to use these techniques. It's how you use them that matters.
It's a tool, like anything else. Can be used for good or bad.
Okay, so now that we know what to look for, how do we spot these techniques out in the wild?
Pay attention to the way people frame things, the language they use, the examples they give.
Like if someone's laying on the compliment super thick while trying to get you to do something.
Could be a red flag. Or those stories about people who messed up because they didn't make the right choice.
Playing on that fear of missing out.
Exactly. And with the article technique, look for cherry picking. Are they giving you the whole picture or just the bits that support their point?
Good point. Healthy skepticism never hurts.
And don't be afraid to ask questions. If someone's trying to influence you, they should be able to back it up.
Okay, so we've spotted it. Someone's trying to pull a fast one. How do we, resist? Once you see the strings, so to speak.
Awareness is the first step. Once you realize what's happening, it's easier to detach from that emotional pull.
Like taking a step back, seeing it from the outside.
Try to pinpoint the technique, how they're trying to make you feel. It loses its power once you name it.
It's like knowing the magician's trick. Suddenly it's not so impressive.
And focus on your own values. What's important to you. Don't let someone else dictate that.
Right. It's my life. I get to choose what I believe.
And if you feel pressured, take your time. No need to rush into a decision you're not comfortable with.
Good advice in general, I'd say. No impulse buys.
Exactly. And if someone's really pushing, set those boundaries.
You're allowed to say no, walk away, or tell them you don't like how they're going about this.
You're in control.
It's kind of crazy how much power our minds have over us, Not always in a good way.
We like to think we're rational, but emotions play a huge role. And our biases, our need to be consistent.
And the fact that we can manipulate ourselves is kind of mind-blowing.
Oh, absolutely. Think about all the times you've rationalized something you knew wasn't good for you.
Or made a decision just to impress someone, even if it meant going against what I really wanted.
We all do it. It's the dark side of this dissonance thing.
So are we just doomed to make bad choices then, if we're all tricking ourselves constantly?
I wouldn't say doomed, but it takes self-awareness to overcome it. That's where the real work begins. And that's what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we've talked about how cognitive dissonance can be used to influence others, but it can also be used to manipulate ourselves.
Yeah.
How do we break free from that?
Well, it all starts with recognizing those moments, when you feel that dissonance.
That clash between what we believe and what we're actually doing.
Exactly. Don't ignore it. Pay attention to it.
So instead of trying to rationalize it away, we should actually lean into that discomfort.
Lean into it. Ask yourself, what's causing this? Is it my values? Am I holding on to a belief that's just not working for me anymore?
Like taking a good hard look in the mirror.
And once you figure out where it's coming from, then you can start to, figure out how to deal with it.
So it's not about making the dissonance go away. It's about using it to, grow.
Exactly. Dissonance is normal. It's what pushes us to learn and change. The trick is to make it work for you, not against you.
Okay, I get that. But how do we actually do that? What are some concrete things we can try?
Mindfulness is a big one. Paying attention to your thoughts and feelings, without judging yourself.
So noticing those little stories we tell ourselves, those justifications for, eating that extra cookie.
Exactly. Once you see it, you can start to question it. Is this really true? Is this what I want to believe?
It's like catching yourself in the act.
Another thing you can try, actively look for information that challenges your beliefs.
Wait, wouldn't that just create more dissonance?
Maybe at first. But remember, dissonance can be a good thing. It makes you think, reevaluate.
So get comfortable with being wrong sometimes.
It's not always fun, but it's how we grow.
And don't forget about your friends,
Yeah.
right? Those people who keep it real with you.
Absolutely. Surround yourself with people who support you, but also who aren't afraid to, call you out when you need it.
Like a team of dissonance detectives.
Helping you spot those blind spots. And remember, this is a lifelong process. It's not a one-time fix.
We're always going to have those moments of dissonance.
The key is to get better at handling them, making them work for us.
This has been amazing. We've really gone deep on this cognitive dissonance thing.
Learned how it can be used, how to spot it, and most importantly, how to use it for good in our own lives.
So, to wrap things up, cognitive dissonance. It's powerful stuff, but it doesn't have to be the enemy.
We can use it to understand ourselves better, make better choices, even become better people.
That's a great takeaway. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring and keep those minds open.